I've waited a really long time to show you this quilt. The timing just never was right. So this is the time to show this one. It's one of my favorites. I purchased it for $60 a few years ago online, and it's just spectacular. As soon as I saw the picture, I had to have it. This quilt measures 87 by 94, so it's huge. It is made up of 99 patches, and that's it. They're just scrappy 9 patches. What really makes this quilt is that sashing, and we'll talk about that more when we take a closer look at this incredible quilt. Before we do that, my name is Chris O'Neill from Sew to Distance. Thank you for joining me, especially for this series. I know so many of you look forward to it, and I do have many more quilts to come. So let's get started taking a closer look at this incredible scrappy 9-patch quilt. All right, let's take a closer look at this beauty. I love this quilt. I love the green. It just, I don't know, pulls everything together, and it's one of those unexpected colors that doesn't really go with any of the blocks, but just makes the whole thing sparkle. So if we look at the blocks, we see that they are 9 patches, and many of them are like this one, where we see solid and florals together, but some are not. And some are like this, where you see contrasting florals together. And some are even like this, where you see contrasting solids together. But what's really interesting is that some are like this one, where the maker took the sashing fabrics and added it in to the block. And there's a couple of those. I can't tell you how excited I was when I saw this, because I couldn't quite figure out what I was seeing. I knew something was off or something was different, but it was a real surprise when I really discovered what it was. Each of these blocks are 7 by 7. Some of them aren't exactly even. We see smaller squares in the corners of some where they were cut off, but the maker did a good job at squaring these up and making sure that the square itself is 7 by 7, and that allowed the sashing strip to fit and everything to come together wonderfully. As for the fabrics, I first thought this entire quilt was from the 1940s or 1950s, but then I noticed fabrics like this that I believe is even from the 1980s. So there's a ton of different fabrics in here. The blocks themselves are all hand pieced, but they're machine stitched together. So what I'm thinking might have happened, this is my working theory, is a maker inherited a bunch of old blocks and put them together and also made additional blocks to go with this quilt. I'm not sure if that's true or not. As with any of these, who knows what the full story is, but that's my working theory on this. So there is this peculiar area here, and hopefully you can see it on camera, where it's a bump. And this is very bulky, and it almost feels like the batting is doubled up here, and this was hand stitched together. So I'm not sure exactly what happened here. Let me know in the comments what you think could be the reason for this. Another cool thing about this quilt, and maybe even cooler than the awesome green sashing, is 2 of the corners are clipped like this. So I'm assuming this is for maybe a 4-poster bed or something. I have seen these before in antique quilts. I do love this element of this quilt. It's really neat. And we see half blocks here. So the maker, I believe, made the whole quilt and then cut this afterward to make the angle. So all in all, there are 88 full 9 patches and 2 half 9 patches. So let's take a peek at the back. So you can see all of the quilting that's done by machine, and the backing is this interesting floral that is around, I think, the 1950s or 1960s. I'm not quite sure. I had trouble finding this exact one, but there are similar ones to this that I came across. It's a nice big piece of fabric, but again, we see this weird lump in the middle right here, where I'm not quite sure what was going on. My guess is it's pieced batting in there, and that's why there's a lump. It wasn't maybe pieced real well, so we do have that, but I'm not positive. The binding was pulled around from the back to the front, and we see that here, and it's just awesome. So let's flip it back around and look at some of these cool fabrics. Quite possibly one of my favorite blocks is this one. There's a few, but I really love this. I love the 2 florals playing together. These look like they are from the 1930s. I love, love, love that. Here's a very interesting one with this yellow print. And here we see that yellow print again paired with a blue print. I love that too. There's so many cool blocks. And I love that the maker took some of the border print and put it into some of the blocks just to give it that extra pizzazz. And if you look at the entire quilt, it just works. It's such a beautiful quilt and so simple too. And there are so many surprises in this quilt, which I also absolutely love. So lessons that we can learn from this really cool quilt. The first thing is that mix of florals and solids and solids and solids and florals and all of the pieces coming together so nicely. Now you can see there are a few lighter ones, which I think give it a little bit more sparkle. I didn't really talk about that when we did the closer look, but it is something worth noting. We see a lot of different values and it just all comes together so well. The second thing we can learn from this quilt is incorporating that sashing into those 9-patch blocks. How incredible is that? It just, I don't know, it adds to it in some way. And I'd love to try it in one of my quilts because I think it really does add a little surprise element while being very consistent with the pattern and the style of the quilt. And finally, the last thing we can learn is you can cut down 9 patches. They're squares, so even if you have to trim them up a little bit and lose some of the 9 patch, it's not going to be noticeable. And you can see that with this quilt. The squares are cut down in all different sizes and it still works. It still looks really nice, especially with that wide sashing. You're not going to really notice that the blocks are uneven unless somebody points them out to you or you have somebody like me looking at a quilt really closely. I hadn't noticed it until I really started studying it and doing some measurements. Thank you so much for joining me for this video. As always, I always test it out on my pooch, which is a Daisy, the wonderful Daisy. She approves of this quilt. Who wouldn't? It's so incredible. I hope you have a wonderful day. I hope you take some time to sew, and I will see you soon. Bye.